Exactly. That didn't go over well.
Testing, whoa, that works, there we go. Okay.
All right, welcome to the party.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to History and Knots. Again, it's, we're about halfway through our 5th year of doing this. And tell everybody, you can come if you want. I'm going to do this regardless of whether anybody shows up or not, because I think it's so much fun. Some folks back there actually came all the way from New York to come to this specifically. Yeah. Well, maybe not specifically, but they said, what can go wrong here? You got beer, you got food, and talk about history. So how many have been to the Carriage Museum? How many, when they get to Raymond, they just keep going? Well, tonight is going to give you the reason to stop in Raymond, or even specifically go to Raymond. I've been there. I haven't met Jerry before. I've met his wife. There she is. No, where is she? She's back there. Wife Laurie, and we had a great talk. Running museums, and there's all kinds of things to talk about for that. But I was so impressed by what you're going to see tonight. And I had the press release, and let me see what I want to say about it. Their museum has been there for 16 years ago. They moved there 17 years ago and opened the museum 1 year later. Jerry has restored and conserved more than 30 of the vehicles. How many do you have altogether?
57.
57. It's just amazing. And, I don't want to take anything away from what Jerry's going to tell you, but this is an amazing place, and there's a story behind every one of the vehicles. And that was, to me, the amazing part, learning the history of all that. So, without further ado, here's Jerry Bowman.
Okay, who's from New York? Okay, remind me, I got a little present for you. You came the furthest. So, all right, that's great. As Steve said, we're the Northwest Carriage Museum. Anybody been there? And other than myself and Steve and my wife Laurie? We have a board member sitting over there, Mike Soa, raise your hand. Mike's one of our board members, and his wife Pam is one of our special employees that works for us over at the museum, and so they came down to have dinner with us tonight. But for those of you who have been through Raymond and not stopped there, shame on you. Just shame on you. I mean, you ought to be embarrassed. Because hopefully after this presentation, you guys are going to want to come up and see us, because we have a fabulous museum. We're in Raymond, Washington. That's the front of our building. We're right on 101 where Highway 6 from Chehalis comes out. And if you were parked on Highway 6 and looking through the roundabout, you'd see our building down there in the right-hand corner. This is the inside of our barn, and I'll talk more about our barn in just a few minutes here. But we're called the Northwest Carriage Museum. Carriage is actually a term, it's a French term that means to carry. And our title is a little bit misleading, because most of the time people think of carriages as really elegant vehicles, and we have a lot of those, and I'll show you some of those. But we have a lot of other style of vehicles too. Wagons, buggies, sleighs, commercial vehicles. Most of the carriages that we're going to talk about tonight, most of them fall in about the 1880, 1890 period of time. Our oldest carriage in the museum is about 1840. And there's a couple that were in the early 20th century, early 1900s. They were still making carriages up through 1915, 1920. Studebaker was making wagons for the U.S. Army during World War I. So they were still using horse-drawn vehicles. We opened, as Steve said, we opened in 2001 with 21 carriages, and those 21 carriages were actually donated to us from a private collector. We're a nonprofit 501c3 group, and those first 21 carriages were donated by a gentleman by the name of Gary Dennis. Have you ever heard of the Dennis Company? Okay, Gary Dennis, his grandfather actually started that company. He was a collector of carriages, and over a course of about I'd say 25 or 30 years, he collected 21, and he had them in a private pole barn on his property. And one day his kids came to him and said, "Dad, what are you going to do with all these?" And they formed a nonprofit group, and that's what got the museum started. We've expanded the museum, that new barn edition that was on that first picture. We expanded that in 2015. And we have, actually it says over 57. We have 50, or 55. We actually have 57 in the museum today. 58 and 59 are in my shop being worked on right now. So we're still adding to it. And we have become the largest tourist attraction in all of Pacific County, including Long Beach. We're drawing about 10,000 people a year now. And so we have a few more if you guys would just stop. Okay? For the purpose of this presentation, we're going to all kind of step back in time here a little bit, okay? And we're going to all jump back to about 1890, okay? 1890, 1895. And things were a little bit different back in that period of time. 1890, us guys, you and I, we are making $400 a year, okay, a year. Now you ladies, you were probably working in family businesses back in those days, and you weren't drawing any salaries. I say that sometimes on tours that we give at the museum, and the ladies say, well, it's kind of the same now. But realistically, families were living on about $400 or $500 a year, and things cost a little bit different. You can see the little buggy down there, ordered out of a catalog, about 40 bucks. You could buy a really nice buggy for about $40 back in those days. You could get a good horse, older horse, for $7 or $8, okay? How many of us have blue jeans on today? How much did your blue jeans cost back in 1895? Your blue jeans, let me tell you, your blue jeans were under $1, okay? And they didn't even have holes in them in those days. The new ones all have holes in them, okay? And you pay for that. What's a pair of blue jeans cost nowadays? 50 bucks, 40 bucks? I don't know. Yeah, a lot of money. Back in those days, they were about 98 cents or so. 3-piece suit, tailored suit. You pick the material, $4, okay? When you used to go to the hardware store back in 1895 and you would buy shovels, if you wanted a shovel back in those days, you bought them in packages of 6 or 12. Why would you buy 6 or 12 shovels? Why would you buy 6 or 12 shovels?
You wear them out.
Yeah, because you used them. Back in those days, you actually used them, and you knew there's no point in buying one. You know you're going to break the handle or damage it, so you bought 6 or 12. 6 shovels, 80 cents. So things were a little different. And I share that with you just to give you a perspective of, well, when we talk about the carriages, you'll see. Back in 1895, the other thing I like to tell, aside from the monetary things, there were a lot of horses in our country. Back in 1895, they say there were 25 million horses in our country. Today, depending on what you can research and read, somewhere around 4 or 5 million. Okay, we have 30, pretty much what we have today in population, 330, about 340 million people in the country. Back in those days, there were 60 million people. So the ratio of people to horses was quite significant, okay? That was 1895, 25 million horses. By 1900, that increased to about 30 million horses, and it peaked about 1903 with about 33 million horses. Now, horses were a problem back in those days. Okay, towns like New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, they were crowded places. Horses everywhere, delivery wagons, carriages, you name it, all kinds of coaches, hacks, all kinds of different types of vehicles were on the road being pulled by horses, including streetcars, okay? Do we have anybody that's a horse person here? Any horse people here? Okay, well, then I can just make up stuff. Let me give you a fun horse stat. Give you a really fun horse stat, okay? The average adult horse, depending on his weight, drops 25 to 35 pounds of manure a day. Okay? Now, think about this, you guys. Think about this. How many of you guys have been to New York City? Show of hands. Well, we know some people have. Okay. In 1895, New York City is a crowded place now, right? It was crowded in 1895. New York City has 10 million people today, 10 million people. How many? Is that about right? Yeah. Back in 1895, they had about 6.5 million people. Okay? Think about this, New York City. 7 days a week, any 24-hour period, they estimate that there were 250,000 horses on the streets on any given day, 7 days a week. So multiply 25 to 35 pounds of manure by 250,000 and think what the streets of New York City were like. Okay? Every other street corner was a stable because they had to house and feed those horses somewhere. How many have been back in New York City when it's real hot and humid and sticky? You ladies, you all wore long skirts. There were actual guys, kids, most of the time, teenagers, that actually, if you gave them a nickel, they would put out a little path for you so you could cross the street. Otherwise, the bottom of your skirts were pretty messy. Yeah. So things were a little different back in those days, and I like to share that with you. Those horses pulled a variety of types of carriages, okay? In the top two carriages there, two beautiful, elegant carriages. The blue and black one on the left, top left, that was actually called a boat front brougham, okay? That little brougham was a 2-passenger compartment. It was actually, this style of carriage was actually invented in 1780 in London, England by Lord Henry Brougham. And old Lord Henry, I tell people he was a lawyer, a politician, and a cheap son of a gun. Okay? And he designed that style of vehicle because he wanted something that he could be pulled through the streets of London with his driver, showing him off. But if he was going to argue all night long in Parliament like they do, he was too cheap to have his driver just stand around and do nothing. So he wanted something small enough that he could drive home himself. So he designed that. And that little 2-passenger compartment, they call that a coupe. That's where we get the word coupe from in the automobile industry. The one on the other side, the right-hand one, that's our landaulet. That's actually from London, England. And it's a very, very elegant carriage. It was made by the Connaught Carriage Company, London, England. Connaught is not a name that you guys know very well, but actually, that vehicle is actually convertible. It breaks apart in the middle and the top folds down, and you can lift those front windows out on a nice day. It's a beautiful, beautiful carriage. The Connaught Carriage Company, the bodybuilders of the Connaught Carriage Company and the person that used to put the upholstery into those carriages, those guys were called trimmers. They used to call upholstery trim back in those days. And the trimmers from Connaught and the bodybuilders went on to a little company in the early 1900s called Rolls Royce. So you can tell that's a pretty high-end carriage. Bottom left-hand corner is our 1888 Stagecoach. I'll talk more about that one. That was made in Stockton, California by a company called H.P. Henderson. And you see that cute little buggy in the right-hand corner? Guess who made that? Studebaker. You guys all thought Studebaker made cars, right?
Yeah.
Studebaker started in the 1850s making wheelbarrows. There was 4 German brothers. They started making wheelbarrows for the California Gold Rush. And by 1880, 2 of those brothers broke off. They went back to South Bend, Indiana, and opened up the Studebaker Wagon Company and Buggy Company. They were producing in 1880. They were the largest producer of horse-drawn vehicles in the country. They were producing 100 vehicles a day. Back in those days, if you were a carriage maker or a wagon maker, if you could do 20 or 30 a week, you were considered huge. They were doing 100 a day. Remarkable production back in those days. Now, we're lucky enough to have 2 absolutely gorgeous, these are probably our most expensive vehicles back in 1895. These are both called C-Spring vehicles. The top one's called a C-Spring dress landau. That's the first carriage you'll see if you come into our museum. The bottom one is called a C-Spring Victoria, named after Queen Victoria of England. And I'll point out a couple things on here. What drove the price of a carriage back in those days was the amount of labor that it took to build it. You have to consider this is all handcrafted. The woodworking is all handcrafted, the metalwork done by blacksmith, very labor intensive. So that top one, if you look at it, it's got a magnificent C-spring system on each wheel. It also has what we call an elliptical spring. You can see it better on the lower one, right there. You see those elliptical springs that today we call leaf springs? Our leaf spring design came from the carriage industry. This has an elliptical spring on each wheel, so does this one, and this very elaborate C-spring system that actually hangs or suspends that wooden body on 4 leather straps. Now that carriage actually has a tensioner on it, which is really interesting because if this was your personal carriage and you were a lady of wealth, we could adjust that tensioner. So if you like a firm ride, we could firm it up for you. Or if you like to float, we could make you float. So yeah, they were really elegant. Now, again, how much did I say the average man was making back? $400 a year, right? This top vehicle right here, you could have bought this in 1895. $1,500. Oh. That's not what I would have been driving in 1895. Okay? In a few minutes, I'll show you my little Studebaker buggy, and that was about $45. Okay? But that was $1,500. This bottom one right here, probably about $1,400. So this was for the very high end. Yeah. Today we would call them the upper 1% that they talk about the politicians all the time. Yeah. A couple of other really special vehicles. Our summer coupe Brougham, the top one here. Beautiful vehicle. Again, little two-passenger compartment called a coupe. This was made by the Brewster Company out of New York, one of America's finest carriage makers. I personally love this one because of the wood. I love natural wood. This is all white oak and the doors are mahogany. Just absolutely gorgeous vehicle. The other thing that's kind of fun about Brewster, you guys probably haven't heard the name Brewster before, but you would have had they made a better business decision in the early 1900s. In the early days of Chevrolet, how many of you guys have owned a Chevrolet? Up until, I want to say 1977, when you opened the car door of a Chevrolet, on the running board, there used to be a little carriage, and it said, body by Fisher. Well, guess what? Chevrolet went to the Brewster Company first, Brewster Carriage Company, and said, we love your body design and your trim work, your upholstery work. Would you like to do that for us? And they turned down Chevrolet because they said, we don't think that car business is going to take off. Chevrolet went to the Fisher Carriage Company, and obviously they did pretty well for themselves. So yeah, that was a bad business decision. The other beautiful carriage that gets lots of attention is our Shelburne Landau. And Landau is this style of top, which was actually invented in 1780 in Landau, Germany. It's called a falling top. It splits apart right there. We could lay this side down or we could lay this side down. And it's a beautiful convertible in the summer months. The other thing that I like to point out on some of these is you notice how the driver's seat is higher than the passenger seat. You see how that driver's seat is higher than the passenger seat? Why do you think that is? So they could see over the horses, protect them from the mud coming up. That's what most people say, and they're wrong too. The real reason for that is it was purely a status symbol. If you could afford these carriages, you could afford a paid driver, a chauffeur. And like on that last one, see the chauffeur sitting right up there? You dressed them elegantly, you showed them off. When you see a carriage where the seats are on the same level, that was a family vehicle. Dad and the boys in the front, mom and the girls in the back. But this was purely a status symbol back in those days. The other thing that this one gets a lot of attention, we get lots of visitors, and if you guys, when you're going through Raymond, stop by, you can take a look at this, okay? But this one right here has actually got some other fame to it. It's an 1895 carriage, but in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, it was owned by the Hutkins Brothers Movie Ranch. And Ace Hutkins and his brother had hundreds of vehicles they used to lease out to the movie industry. They raised horses, too, down in Southern California. And they actually sold Trigger to Roy Rogers, Silver from the Lone Ranger. Those were all Hutkins Brothers horses. But that particular carriage, any old movie buffs here? You're looking at Belle Watling's carriage from Gone with the Wind. That was the actual carriage used in Gone with the Wind. We actually have it playing in our museum. We have several movie carriages. That little Sea Spring Victoria that I was telling you about earlier, that's one down here. That was in Shirley Temple's Little Princess. If you ever watch that movie, you'll see that. Actually, my wife just reminded me this was, This was also in, not only Gone with the Wind, but there was a movie with Betty Davis called Jezebel. It was in that movie too. It's an original carriage, but these were all sold at auction after the heyday of Hollywood, and we're lucky enough to have that. We do a lot of advertising with that. You wouldn't believe how many women come in and want to take their picture with Belle Watling's carriage from Gone with the Wind. We also have some unusual looking vehicles too. One of my favorites, this one right here, is actually called a turn under trap. It was made by the Stratton Company out of Muncie, Indiana. And they sold this as a combination vehicle. If we were in the museum, I could demonstrate this. But see right here where it's a little single seat buggy? They actually call this a sporting buggy. But this seat actually flops forward and this part lifts out and then this is hidden back there. So you can make a four-seater out of it. And they call that a turn under trap. People think that that's kind of a modern invention with our modern day vans and stuff, but they've been using it for a long, long time. The other one that's down here, our Kimball Coach, gets a lot of attention. It's a beautiful, elegant coach. This picture doesn't do it justice. It's a much bigger coach than it looks like in the picture. This has got what they call vis-a-vis seating, which is face-to-face seating. Vis-a-vis is French for face-to-face. So the seat in here easily would fit 4 to 6 people inside. But the other thing is this Kimball Company was a company out of Chicago. And they actually, there were 9 generations of Kimball coach makers. They started in the, just like the history of our country, they started up in Maine and built carriages and sleighs, moved down to New York, and eventually off to Chicago where they did most of their business. They were one of America's finest carriage makers. But what's interesting about this particular vehicle is that we know a lot about our manufacturing history of all of our carriages. I pride myself in knowing a lot of that type of history, and we speak at a lot of events like this, but we don't always know the personal history of carriages. This is an exception to that. This was once owned back in Illinois by a guy by the name of F.C.A. Dankman. You guys know about that? I didn't think so. I didn't. But Dankman actually owned a grocery store back in a small town in Illinois, and he came home one day and he said to his wife, "The lumber mill in town is for sale, we should buy that." And his wife said, "Well, go ahead and buy it." And she said, "Well, we can't really," he said, "we can't really afford it. We don't have the cash flow." She said, "Go to my brother, he'll help you." "No, I don't want to do that." He goes, "No, go to my brother, he'll help you." So Dankman went to his brother-in-law and said, "Would you like to back me on this endeavor?" He said, "Sure." His brother-in-law happened to be a guy by the name of Frederick Weyerhaeuser. You guys have heard that name, haven't you? Yeah. Weyerhaeuser not only backed him, Dankman actually ran the business. They opened the Weyerhaeuser-Dankman Lumber Company back in the Mississippi Valley. That one lumber mill became 3 lumber mills within about a year. And then Weyerhaeuser broke off and came out here to the Pacific Northwest, and as we all know, bought most of Oregon and Washington, right? So, yeah, he did pretty well for himself. But this was one of Dankman's 3 coaches. It's absolutely gorgeous. Just like there's beautiful ways to be carried during life, there were beautiful ways to be carried in a horse-drawn vehicle after life, too. This is our 1900 Vienna hearse. Came from Vienna, Austria. And the picture doesn't really do us justice, but along the walls here and all this scroll work, this is all hand-carved. It's one of the largest vehicles we have in the museum. Very, very heavy. Probably weighs close to 2 tons. But it's all hand-carved, and it's got kind of an amazing story, actually. Came over to our country in a shipping container in the 1960s and got sold to an antique store in Salt Lake City, Utah. And they in turn sold it to a private party who took it to Park City, Utah. Anybody been to Park City, Utah? Snow, skiing, and all that. That guy parked it out in his front yard for 35 years and let it rot. And it's been fully restored. The gentleman that gave it to us did most of the restoration work on it and used it great, but it's an incredible vehicle. We've had this about 3 years now. About 6 months before we got it, it was used for a lady's funeral in Port Angeles, Washington. The lower one, we also have several vehicles that are not horse-drawn. This is actually a hand-pulled funeral bier, not beer like we're drinking, but beer. And this was actually 1870, came from Europe. Beautiful. It's got an understructure similar to a horse-drawn cart, but you see the legs here and you see the arms here. These arms actually lift up. So we can put a pallbearer at each side, end of that, and there's some pins right here, and there's one in the back. We can pull that off, and you can carry the entire table into the church with the casket on it, and set it down, have the service, and then bring it back out, put it on the wheels, and take it to the cemetery. The craftsmanship on some of this stuff is just absolutely beautiful. Oop. There we go. This is an American hearse called a carved panel hearse. It's also called an 8-column hearse. It's got 8 columns here, but again, if you were in our museum, you would see this is all hand-carved wood. Incredible. 1888, this was made in Ohio by a company called Sayer and Scoville. Wintertime, there were a variety of different types of sleighs. We didn't see so many sleighs out here, but on the East Coast and Midwest, you saw a lot of them. This top one is actually called a town sleigh. This style of sleigh is actually referred to as a Portland cutter. It was designed in Portland, Maine. But this is a high-end Portland cutter because of the springs. Most sleighs did not have springs, so this was considered to be a high-end sleigh. This would have sold for about $400 versus $100 for a normal sleigh. Our other sleighs are coachman sleigh, very, very elegant coachman sleigh. Raised seat, it was driven by a driver. The restoration on this, you guys would get a kick out of it if you saw this in person. And they use things like sleigh blankets or they call it aprons up here. You see this beautiful apron here? I happen to bring it with me. It's actually called a Strook carriage blanket. I'm going to have you hold my microphone here. Look at the color of this. This is horsehair. Waterproof. Made in 1860. Feel how warm that is. Feel the thickness of that. Isn't that beautiful? Yeah. We're lucky enough to have several of these. They made the Strook carriage blankets between 1860 and 1920 in New York. They were noted for their beautiful colors. Just absolutely beautiful. And after the presentation, if anyone wants to come up and touch that, I mean, it's just incredible how thick that would. It would kept you nice and warm during the day. Just like there were all those high-end family vehicles, there was also a lot of family vehicles. Our little Studebaker buggy I told you about, $45 to $50, when that other one, same period of time, cost $1,500. Okay? And what was funny about that is a lot of the buggies, there were thousands of buggy makers. Studebaker was just one of many, many buggy makers in our country. And depending on how you ordered this and depending on what you could afford, you ordered these out of catalogs. Sears, Montgomery Ward sold buggies. And this one's set up, like I said, for $45, $50, but if you couldn't afford that, you didn't have to get the top on it. You didn't have to get leather seats on it. You could have got just wooden bench seats, no top on it. You could have knocked about $19, $20 off the price of that. Maybe you bought this for $25, $30 at the most. So it depended on what you could afford. Fringe top Surrey, you guys see the movie Oklahoma? Anyone want to sing the song? No? Okay. Me neither. You wouldn't want me to sing that song. But the fringe top Surrey was basically the family station wagon of the day, okay? And I got to tell you, most people come in and say, oh, Oklahoma, fringe top Surrey, and they think all Surreys had fringe top. Not all Surreys had fringe top, not all Surreys had tops. It was depending on what you could afford. Our Surrey is set up kind of high end. It would have probably cost around $300 in 1890s. But you didn't have to get that top on it, you didn't have to get leather on it, you didn't have to get a nice paint job on it, you certainly didn't have to get carriage lights on it. And you could have got this down to about $60, depending on what you could afford. That Surrey, by the way, was made by the Valai Carriage Company. William Valai was a carriage maker who was a descendant of John Deere, and in the early 1900s, he actually ran the John Deere Plow Company. So you guys know John Deere from tractors today, but they used to make plows. A lot of commercial type vehicles back in the day. This is our handsome cab. This was used as a taxi cab in New York City in Central Park back in the 1890s. And these made great taxi cabs. You see the driver sits up top and two people. You guys want to go on a cab ride? You hail the cab over, you get inside. And see these doors right here? It's really kind of neat. They're called wing doors. You close one, they both close. There's a series of cables that go around under the upholstery underneath, and they're connected, so they both close at the same time. What's kind of neat about it is you get inside, you close your wing doors, and it's hard to see, but there's actually a window right here that's attached to that line right there that goes up to a crank right behind him. And that window, you close your wing doors, and you crank down the window, now you're nice and secure in there, ready to, go for a cab ride. On the very top of these cabs, you see that little mechanism right there? That's the top of a little trap door. There's a hole in the top about this big. That's how he talks to you. So he opens it up and says, "Where do you want to go?" You tell him where you want to go. He takes you to your destination. When you get there, he opens up that trap door, and he makes sure you pay him before he uncranks the window. He didn't want to be stiff for the ride. Over in Europe, these kind of cabs were actually both commercial as well as private. In our country, in America, they were primarily commercial vehicles. And these two-wheel vehicles were called gigs, and they made great taxi cabs for one very important reason. New York City, Chicago, Philadelphia, where there was so many horses on the road, if you got picked up in a four-wheel vehicle, in order to go the opposite way, sometimes you had to go around several blocks. With these, they actually teach the horse, and we've actually done this with horses, they teach the horse to do a stationary turn, and we teach the horse to literally go like this. And that thing will just pivot in the road, and you can go the other way. So it's very convenient. These wheels will just pivot in the road. Yeah.
The horn? What's that for?
Which one?
The horn.
This one?
Yeah.
That's actually a carriage lamp. Yeah, that's a carriage lamp. On both sides of the carriage lamp. In towns, a lot of vehicles had carriage lamps, and they were either candle or kerosene. And they did not provide illumination like we think of headlights on a car today. It was just to kind of be seen, but those were all only in town. Outside in town, the roads were so bad, you didn't see carriage lamps on those kind of vehicles because they would just get beat up and broken. Yeah. One of our favorite vehicles in the museum is our little 1870 mail cart. And this one's actually his kind of close to home. You guys know where Cornelius, Oregon is? Everybody? Right over the hill here, right? Not too far away. This used to deliver mail in Cornelius, Oregon in the 1870s, 1880s. What's kind of neat about it is when people come into the museum, they look at this and they say, "Are you going to restore this?" I say, "Restore it? Heck, that's already been in the shop for 4 weeks. You should see it when we got it." And what's neat about it, we did more of a conservation of this. We wanted to keep it as original as possible, but inside, you can see his canvas mail bags. He sat inside of here. The horse was out in front here, and the reins came through the window right here. This is the original postman over in Cornelius doing that. They actually called the mail service back in those days RFD, Rural Free Delivery. That's what the mail service was called. And I'll share with you something that's kind of fun here. When we got this vehicle and we had it up in the shop, we had all that taken it apart and we had the seats out of it, and I chipped off probably a good 2-3 inches of mud on the very bottom of the cab, and when I chipped that out, I found studded horseshoes. You don't think about that. But those horses were slipping and sliding on icy roads when they were delivering mail in December or January, so they gave them little traction shoes. And we found studded horseshoes on there. Yeah, pretty neat. We got several of those. This wagon right here, this is what built America. This is actually a Mitchell farm wagon. A lot of you guys know the story of the Oregon Trail and all that. You think about the prairie schooners that came over and whatever that were smaller Conestoga type wagons. Realistically, there were more of these type wagons on there. This is basically a farm wagon. America had many major wagon makers. Studebaker, this was a Mitchell Lewis wagon, Bain, Peter Shuttler, Weber, there was all kinds, but this is what built America. And this is actually called a 2-board wagon. It's a pretty good sized wagon. It's in our shop, but they actually made a 3-board, which you can picture this another board up higher, and they even made a 4-board that was this high, and they use those for grain and stuff on, moving grain around. So they designed them in all different ways. But this picture right here, we just love the picture. We got this from another presentation, but This building right here, if you guys come up to see our museum, on your way up, stop in South Bend. South Bend's a town right next to us, and on the way up to the hospital, this building is still there. It's called the transfer building, but notice the plank roads that they had back in those days. Wooden plank roads that these horses rode on. Pretty neat. We're going to talk more about that Mitchell wagon in just a second here. A lot of different types of construction type equipment. This is our running gear. This running gear is basically the undercarriage of any of our wagons. Except this one's a little different. It's a little bit larger, but this piece that connects the axles right down the middle right here, it's actually called a reach. And you notice that on this one, there's a pin. It's hard to see on this slide, but there's a pin right there, and that's called a slip reach. So we can pull that pin and we can extend this wheelbase out, and that's how they used to do logging. That's how they used to carry 40-foot 2x4s to the construction site. That's how they did that. The other one that's really interesting is our road grader down here. We got this off of a ranch in Northern California a couple of years ago. It was all frozen up and sat out there for years and years. And we got it totally functional, but this was pulled by two big draft horses made in Aurora, Illinois by a company called the Western Wheel Scraper Company. A driver sat up here and an operator back here. No hydraulics. It was all manual. Very tough work. But you can still grade a road with this right now if you wanted to. It's a totally working road grader. The first 600 of these that they made, this company, they actually went to the railroad industry to lay track across the country. So very important. That's what they were originally designed for. And of course our chuck wagon. You guys all seen Western movies with chuck wagons going through and whatever. Yeah. Chuck wagons, this is our 1890 Springfield chuck wagon. And what's fun about this one is we actually got this from a really neat couple down in Arizona a few years ago who were members of the American Chuck Wagon Association for about 15 years before they retired. And they used to go through Texas and Oklahoma and all kinds of other places and actually do chuck wagon cook-offs. Well, he was most proud of the fact that his wagon used to win for authenticity all the time. She was most proud of the fact that her beams won the competition. Now what was fun about it is back in the, chuck wagons weren't around all that long. They were invented in Texas by a guy by the name of Charlie Goodnight. He was a Texas rancher, 1867 I believe it was. There was a need to drive cattle to the major towns before the railroads could take that over there. So they would drive the cows anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 head of cattle with 10 to 12 cow hands, a trail boss, and a cook. And this guy down here, he was worshipped out there, just worshipped. He not only was your cook, but all your bedrolls went in here went the next morning. If you got hurt, he sewed you up. Okay? If your horse got sick, he fixed your horse. This is one guy you didn't want to make mad at you when you were out on the road. You were out there working 15 to 18-hour days, 3 months, and you made $70 during that 3-month period of time. Those were good wages back in those days. Yeah, really, really fun. I'll show you a couple other things too that get a kick out of these. When we got this from the nice couple from Arizona, I know a lot about wagons and carriages and all that stuff, and I don't know necessarily a lot about cooking. So she was going through some of the cooking parts to it. She picked up this and she said, "Jerry, what is that?" You guys know what that is? See that? Metal part. What do you think?
Clean.
Whisk. Someone said whisk. That's what I said and I was wrong too.
Does it clean the skillet?
What? Cleaning. Yeah, it's a pot scrubber. For those cast iron pots, this was a pot scrubber. This was your Brillo pat back in those days. Okay. The other one that I got a kick out of is she picked up this. And she said, "Jerry, what is this?" And I got to be honest with you, I looked at her and I said, "Tea." And she went like this, and I'm not kidding you. She went, "How big of a teacup would you need for that?" And I obviously knew that that was not the right answer. What do you guys think? Anybody know? Some of you guys don't know.
All right.
How do you know all this?
She's smart.
Oh. Did you hear what she said? Soap. These guys out here, okay. These guys out here did not, they did not waste anything. So all those little chunks of soap that you end up with that you don't throw away, they squeezed them all together, put them in here, this became your dishwater soap. Yeah. I'm impressed. You need to come and do tours in our museum. All right, so here we got a special treat for you. I'm going to first of all talk to you about our Henderson Stagecoach. This coach down here is 1888. It was used in Northern California and Southern Oregon, and it was a 9-passenger stagecoach. So there's some seats here, 3 people sitting with their back to here, 3 people here, and there used to be a bench seat that went right across the middle right here. And that bench seat was cheaper because you had nothing to lean back on. I'd like to go a couple hundred miles in a stagecoach, but nothing. I wouldn't be able to walk at the end of the day. But yeah, this is actually a usable stagecoach, but it's in original condition. The other one here, you see this one up here on top? This is actually from London, England. And it was part of the Royal Mail Service. And doesn't it look like it'd be a fancy stagecoach? It really wasn't. Its primary purpose was to deliver mail. This went between London and Exeter. Anybody been over to Europe, London and Exeter? About 200 miles, and a lot of little towns in between. This kind of vehicle used to leave London pulled by 6 horses. There's a big compartment in the front here, and they call this area a boot. If you go rent a car in Europe, the trunk's called the boot. That's where they got that term from. But this would be filled with mail and freight, and there's a bigger one in the back here. And as a secondary source of income, if you happened to be going out to one of these towns, you could catch a cheap bus ride on it, but you were really considered secondary. If the horses had trouble pulling this up a hill, you got off and helped push. Okay? But the other important thing here is that, you see this seat right here in the back? There used to be a guard that sat up there, and he was under government contract. He had a sawed-off shotgun, a black powder shotgun called a blunderbuss. His job was to protect the mail at all costs, but his other important job was to sound, see the coach horn right there? He sounded the coach horn, okay? And the reason why he sounded that coach horn is because when this thing got moving, and there were people in front of him, 6 horses and stuff, he sounded that horn to tell people, get out of our way because we can't slow down. When he got to town, he could play different songs to tell the townspeople, we have mail, we have freight, so they knew whether to come and meet the coach or not. The other thing is that this was pulled by 6 horses, but they weighted it down so much that those horses could only pull it maybe 4 to 4.5, 5 miles at the most. So about every 5 miles or so, they had a post house where they had extra horses. And about a half mile out, this guy would sound the horn to tell that guy, get the horses ready, we're coming in. Now, during tours, I actually demonstrate this horn. We got this horn in the original leather scabbard here, and I'll show you the horn in a second. We got this horn from a really neat lady who visited a museum about 2 years ago. And she said to me, I was telling her that story about the road coach, and she said, Jerry, do you know what hangs on my living room wall? And I said, I don't have a clue. She said, an 1862 Polar coach horn. And she said, we come down to Camp Beach all the time. She lived in north of Seattle. And she said, we're going to bring that to you and give it to you. And I said, wow, that'd be very special. And she did. And then when she gave it to me, she said, you know what, I don't know how it ever survived. She said, I had 3 older sisters, and when we were little, we used to play with it. So we don't know how it survived. But we're very lucky tonight, because if I played it for you, it would kind of sound like if we were out in the parking lot and if I ran over a cat with my truck. Okay? But instead, we had somebody here. Gary Lewis happened to be a visitor, and his wife Jody visited our museum a couple years ago, and I was talking about this, and he said, do you mind if I play? And he's a horn player, and he happens to live down in Manzanita. And when he heard we were speaking tonight, he decided to come up. So he's going to demonstrate 1862 Polar coach horn, which is really cool, but it's loud. I'm going to tell you it's loud. Gary?
Clear the road.
So you guys want to hear me? No, never mind. That is very special.
Any other things?
Gary actually not only a horn player, but one of the fun things about him, we got talking, he's actually a practicing blacksmith. So, yeah, if I need parts or something on a carriage or something like that, he's a go-to guy. So, yeah, it's really cool. So, yeah, thank you, Gary. Really, really neat. How are we doing on time? Okay.
It's okay.
Are we okay? We okay? Yeah. All right. Okay.
We're good.
We talked about all those stagecoaches and stuff. I just love old pictures and stuff. This is actually a drawing, but there used to be a stagecoach. You guys know where El Waco is, right over the bridge there. You know where Oysterville is in the end of the peninsula? There used to be a stagecoach that used to run at low tide along the beach before they put the train in there, the clamshell railroad that they put in there. And this is an actual picture, 1895. Notice how wide the tires are, because they used to run on the sand at low tide, but it's just such a neat picture. And don't you just love the way these people dress? Look at these guys. These guys are carriage drivers and stuff and whatever, and all have ties on and everything, kind of like us, right? So I just love it. So when we went from the horse-drawn era, and we were moving into the motorized vehicles, you can see the similarities. Early horse-drawn, the first horse-drawn vehicles, or motor-driven vehicles, were called horseless carriages. And you can see our little Studebaker buggy here, and you can see a Studebaker car. Very similar in design. They added a motor in the back, different wheels on it, and different types of tires, but they put a brake system in it. Instead of a steering wheel, they had a tiller on here. And you can see our produce cart here from the 1890s. This is our produce cart, but you can see the similar design. You picture our produce cart with solid sides on it and painted white. Looks just like the mail or the milk wagons that used to deliver milk to our houses. And you guys remember those? So horse-drawn to motorized, very similar in design. And the interesting thing is that, you know, we talked about the manure problem and all that, and they say New York cities and places like that, the stench was so bad. You know, when they moved from horse-drawn carriages to horseless carriages, you know what the marketing was back in those days? The solution to pollution. The automobile would be the solution to pollution. And they were right for a while. I mean, you know, people don't realize that going back to all of the horse manure on the streets of New York City. I've been asked on tours before what they do with all that back in those days. They used to have hundreds of guys following work wagons, doing nothing but this, all day long. And people say, well, okay, they picked it up, what they do with it? They backed those wagons up to barges, took it right out in the rivers that surround New York City, through the rivers. So that was the solution to pollution, no doubt about it, back in those days. As the need for petroleum products was developed, the need to get it to market was there as well. This is our 1890s, late 1890s kerosene wagon. Standard Oil had, along railroad stations, they had 3,000, in 1900, they had 3,000 what they called filling stations, and that's what this was. And our wagon is just a small kerosene wagon. But you see this one, it's a lot bigger. This is a 250-gallon tank. This is a 900-gallon tank, and it carried gasoline, kerosene, and heating oil. But they had to get that out to those, the rural areas or whatever, and that's how they did it.
I got one question for you.
Yes, sir.
Go back to that picture for a second.
Okay.
I've been noticing in a lot of these, they had the larger wheels and the smaller wheels. Is it for ride or suspension, or is there a reason for it?
Yeah, it's a great question. He's asking about the front wheels being smaller. You'll notice that on most vehicles, not all, but just about probably 90% of them. The reason being is it was a steering thing. On a horse-drawn vehicle, you want the wheels to be as large as possible because of the draft of the horses. So the larger the wheel, the easier it is for the horse to pull. So you want your wheels to be as large as possible. But if you made that front wheel as big as the back wheel, you'd have a turning problem because that wheel would interfere when it went to turn. It would run up against the body of it. So they lowered those a little bit. That one probably has 48-inch wheels in the back and probably 38-inch wheels in the front. Yeah. That answer your question?
Thank you.
Anybody watch Travel Channel Mysteries at the museum? You ever seen that television program? We were lucky enough, about a year and a half, I guess 2 years ago, we were lucky enough to be on that. And they used our stagecoach, our 1888 Henderson Stagecoach as a backdrop. And I tell the story of this lovely lady right here. Her name was Mary Field. Mary was also known as Stagecoach Mary. Mary was a remarkable, remarkable lady, and they still rerun this. They showed this the first time in, I think it was October of 2017. We were told 1 million people saw it across the country, and it's reran about 25 times since then that we know of. We get people walking into the museum almost daily going, you know, we saw you guys on TV. Where are you from? Florida. We saw you on TV, so it's amazing, actually. But Mary was quite a lady. She was described as over 6 foot tall, well over 200 pounds. She was born a slave in 1832 and didn't get her freedom until the age of 33 after the Civil War. And she had great carpentry skills, apparently, and also driving skills. And she had a variety of jobs over the years. She ended up in Cascade, Montana, which is a little town kind of in the middle of Montana. And Mary got a job driving the stagecoach for the U.S. Postal Service. She was the first African-American female to get a U.S. postal route in the United States. And she did that at the age of 60. Now what's remarkable, any of you guys drive horses? Okay, probably not, okay. It takes a lot to drive a horse, and to drive 6 horses is really difficult. I mean, it's tough to do. And Mary, she got the job because she could hitch up a team of 6 horses faster than any 25-year-old guy that she was competing with. So she was a remarkable lady. The other neat thing about Mary is that she was beloved in the town of Cascade. They absolutely loved her. And because she was born a slave, they didn't know her birthday, or she didn't know her birthday. So the town selected 2 days a year and celebrated her birthday, shut the town down, shut the schools down twice a year, and they celebrated Mary's birthday. The other thing about Mary is that she smoked hand-rolled cigars, drank whiskey from a jug, and could cuss with the best of any sailor. And she had a standing offer in Montana that she could knock out any man with 1 punch. And apparently there were some guys stupid enough to take her up on the offer. So she was just a remarkable lady. Laurie and I were back in Montana a couple years ago, wasn't it? And we were looking for wagons and some other things. And we actually found her grave marker in Cascade. It was pretty neat. And yeah, she was just a remarkable lady. If you still watch the museum, and this is the museum, it's under Stagecoach Mary. Take a look at that. As I said, we have several carriages in the museum that were in the movies. We talked about Gone with the Wind, our Shelburne Landau. Little Princess, I mentioned, that beautiful Sea Spring Victoria that I talked about. And Virginia City, I don't know, you guys ever see the movie Virginia City? Errol Flynn, Humphrey Bogart, 1939 classic. There's our stagecoach. There's our stagecoach in 1939. There's a young Humphrey Bogart and Errol Flynn in front of our stagecoach. You see that guy right there? Anybody recognize him? That's a skipper from Gilligan's Island. That's a hell of a hail. Now, I don't think Gilligan was on here back in those days, but that's our stagecoach. It was used throughout the movie, and it's really neat. We get a lot of attention with that one. We have that playing in the museum as well. We have a lot of other artifacts in the museum, lots of period clothing that's been donated to us over the years. The ladies particularly love that. The street carriage blankets I've already showed you. We have a beautiful amethyst glass collection. You guys know about amethyst glass, purple glass, antique glass? You know the story on amethyst glass? Amethyst glass, real amethyst glass, was made between 1860 and 1920. And up to that point, glass had a clarity problem. It was oftentimes cloudy or grayish looking. So some chemist guy came up with this idea that if we added a chemical called manganese to the glass making process, it would clear it up. And lo and behold, it did. So they added this chemical in all their household products, glass bottles, doorknobs, everything, nice and clear. Unbeknownst to them, that by adding that chemical, when that glass is exposed to sunlight, it slowly turns purple. They didn't know that at the time, and now it's very valuable. After 1920, people liked purple glass, so they actually added a dye. But real amethyst glass, the stuff that's expensive, is the stuff made between those years that actually had that chemical. The insulator from the top of the telephone pole, you can see how dark it becomes because it received a lot more sunlight. In theory, you could take any of that glass and put it outside on nice sunny days, and over a period of years, it will still slowly turn a deeper purple. And I tell people, I'll let you in on a little secret, our amethyst glass collection, we have it in a beautiful case, people really love it and stuff, but it really belongs to my wife over there. Okay, it's on loan to the museum. But I tell people it's on loan to the museum for only one reason, she doesn't have to dust it at home. This is my theory. We do all kinds of tours at the museum, schools, RV clubs, car clubs love us. Church groups, you name it. If any of you guys from this area belong to any kind of group or whatever, we love doing tours, and contact Laurie and we'll set something up. We can accommodate just about any size tour. We have a lot of fun. Because of the number of vehicles we have in there, we usually take about an hour and a half, but we can tailor a tour to anything that you need. There we go. We also have a one-room classroom. The kids love it back there. It's interactive. One-room school. You see the little girls with chalkboard? They don't use chalkboards anymore. A lot of kids go, this is kind of neat. They should have these in our schools. But they don't use chalkboards anymore. We also have a wheelwright blacksmith display. We can talk about how wheels were made depending on what people want to know. Like I said, car clubs love us. Last year we had Franklin tour come through. Franklins were made in the early 1900s. We have a big, huge parking lot in front of our museum. It was really neat. We had like 30 Franklins out in front. It was really kind of neat to get our own car show. Last summer we had like 55 Mustangs in our parking lot, 100 people in the museum. And the Pacific Northwest Porch Club loves us, and they've been back several times. What's really funny, the last time they came back, and I love this picture, they wanted to know if I wouldn't mind pulling out my $45 Studebaker so they could put it next to their $100,000 Porsche and take pictures. And we made all our national magazines and everything. We got a lot of good advertising on it, but they just loved it. It took them about an hour. Everyone wanted to get a picture with the Studebaker, so we had a lot of fun with that. Our museum is also noted for its restoration and conservation work. This is a little box sleigh I'm working on in our shop. Depending on the vehicle, they come in different conditions. You can see this one, we had to do some work on the dashboard. We had to repaint and sand it down, repainted it, and you can see the end product in here. This is a little 1870 sleigh that was made in Machias, Maine, actually. So if you've ever been back in the Maine area, made by a company called G.W. Fisher. Again, they come in different conditions. This is a Portland Cutter sleigh. The dashboard on the Portland Cutters, this is actually a 3-part laminate. And they actually used to steam build those. So oftentimes, over the years, those aren't stored properly, so that they separate and stuff. So we have to do a lot of glue work on it before we actually end up painting and sanding them down and then restoring them to their original beauty. And we do restore everything to its original color. So we're very proud of that, and we keep it very accurate. This is that Mitchell wagon I was telling you about, and what's kind of fun about this one, this is the before of the Mitchell wagon. This is after, as it sits in our museum. You see all the original pinstriping and the orange under here? Right here, if you were in the museum, it would say Mitchell Lewis Staver. We're the third owners of this wagon. It was sold down in Portland, Oregon, not too far from here, in 1892. It was actually made in Racine, Wisconsin. We got it from a guy that had it in his family for 61 years. We got it, it looked like that. See that? This is the actual piece that we call a toe board, which is this piece right here. The toe board on this was rotted out. You can see what we were dealing with on here. And this is the original color. We went over this with a quadruple-lot steel wool and a toothbrush, every inch of it. And underneath, we chipped off all the 150-year-old grease with a chisel and a hammer. And then we re-oil it with a linseed oil turpentine combination, and we bring back the original color. When we do that kind of conservation work, it actually takes longer to do that than it would be just to sand it down and paint it. but it keeps its original patina and it keeps its original history, and it also keeps the value up. That wagon right there at auction today would sell for probably about $17,000 today. Had I just stripped it down and painted it a nice color, it would be worth about $7,000. So it helps maintain the value. This is just working on that wagon. Watch this. I'm using a fishing fillet knife right there to clean 120-year-old grease off there. And watch when we apply the linseed oil after we get it all cleaned up. Watch what happens. It's a very rewarding process when we get them all done. And by the way, when you use linseed oil, anybody ever use that? Once we got this painted, several coats of linseed oil, then it sat in a carport for about 6 weeks because we couldn't bring it into the museum. The smell is overwhelming. But it works great. That's what they used to use originally. Our museum is nationally recognized for our for carriage information and research and history and restoration questions. We're part of the Carriage Association of America, based in Lexington, Kentucky. We're also part of the Stagecoach and Freight Wagon Association. We've been published in their trade magazines, and we've gotten a lot of attention from that. We've even spoken at some of their conferences. There we go. We've been written up in all kinds of publications. We were on Evening Magazine, of course, Mysteries at the Museum. AAA, if you guys are AAA member, you see us in the Journey Magazine. We've been featured in that several times. A lot of good, the historians have been really nice to us, Seattle Times, so we get a lot of good press. And with that, I can tell you that we're open every day of the year. We close on Christmas Day and Thanksgiving. Otherwise, we're open 363 days a year.
Except for this Saturday,
Yeah.
the 29th, we have a special event, so don't come in. We pride ourselves in being open, and then we're going to be closed on the 29th.
Yeah, you can come tomorrow or you can come Sunday, but don't come Saturday because we have a wedding actually in the barn, and we're closing the museum that day. Normally we're open 10 to 4 any day, and we would love to have you guys visit. We have a really neat visitor center with all kinds of literature, things to do in the area. We survive on admissions, donations, memberships. I should also put in there grants because we get a lot of grant money or have to build our museum. We have a very unique gift shop that Laurie and Pam do a great job at selecting local products, and we have jewelry and scarves and all kinds of stuff, so it's a fun place to do a little shopping. We have two pretty simple goals, actually. We're trying to preserve horse-drawn history, and also because we're such a small town up there, we're very proud of the fact that we're supporting local businesses. We're drawing 10,000 people, and those people are eating in our restaurants and buying our gasoline and restocking their RVs at our grocery stores, so it's really helping the local families, so we're very, very proud of that. And up in Raymond, you guys have already told me you just kind of passed through, but there's a lot of stuff to do up there, okay? So come up and spend a day with us. And Raymond is noted for its metal artwork. There's over 200 statues in Raymond, they say. Right next door to us, there's a really neat museum called the Seaport Museum. If you come Monday through Friday, our working courthouse in South Bend is one of the most beautiful buildings you've ever seen. You should see the glass rotunda in there, and it's just fabulous. The county seat for Pacific County is in South Bend, and the history is back in the 1890s, a bunch of guys from South Bend went over to Oysterville and stole all the records and moved over there. So that's why that building was built. And South Bend also has a really neat little museum on the logging industry and stuff, the Pacific County Historical Museum, so it's a fun place to go to. In addition to that, what we're really proud of, and our area is growing a little bit. We like to think that we're a major part of that, or a reason why people are stopping. But just over the last couple of years, the breweries, we have two. We have the Willowpaw Brewing Company in South Bend and Wildman Brewery in Raymond. Those weren't there a couple of years ago. Pitchwood Ale House is a great place for food and sandwiches, and also has an inn, a really neat little bed and breakfast type place. 15 miles from us is the Tokeland Hotel, the oldest hotel in all of Washington. It was really neat. The couple that bought it are restoring it and doing just a great job on it. Woohoo Winery, if any of you have ever been over to Leavenworth, Washington, Woohoo Winery is in Leavenworth. They used to produce their wine over there. They still have the retail store over there, but they're doing that now in Raymond, Washington, not too far from us. Really good people, and they moved their operation over there, and they have a tasting room over there. The Willowpaw Lavender Farm is relatively new, out on Highway 6, about 5 miles out from our museum. If you like lavender, come in July. You've never seen anything so pretty. You don't have to go all the way to Squim anymore. So that's pretty nice. Several other places to eat, Sheila's and Slater's, and of course Dennis Company has been very supportive of us over the years. You can get all your clamming stuff and sporting goods and all that kind of stuff over there. So with no further ado, I will just close by telling you that that's our staff, that's me and Laurie and Pam's there, and a couple of the ladies that work for us, are saying just come get carried away at the Northwest Carriage Museum, and it is a pleasure to be able to talk to you guys tonight. So thank you. Sure.
How did you get into, how did you get started?
Me personally?
Well, yeah.
My wife, the question is, how did we get started in this? The museum opened in 2002, like I told you earlier. My wife and I, we retired. We were blessed enough to be able to retire early from Southern California. And we've been up here 17 years. We joined the museum about a year and a half, 2 years after it opened. And I've been restoring antiques and doing woodworking for many, many years. Laurie became the education coordinator and was doing tours and things like that. And then I kind of got involved because the collection needed some maintenance. And then I started acquiring stuff, and we've just grown and grown. Our museum right now, with the new addition of the barn, is about 13,000 square feet of display space. So yeah, we've got some significant amount of stuff. Yeah, but and it's just a passion. I love carriages. I mean, coming to a place like this, I get to talk to you folks, nice folks, about carriages and stuff. I get to drink beer, so I love carriages, I love beer, I love talking to you guys. So it's like a perfect world. I mean, it doesn't get much better.
When he does tours, I have to do this because and then someone says, "No, keep going."
Well, thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes, sir.
Having watched 20 years worth of Gunsmoke and Bonanza, what is a buckboard?
A buckboard. A buckboard is actually, you know those buggies that I was showing, like our Studebaker buggy?
Yeah.
Buckboard is basically a flat boards on the bottom with a seat on front that doesn't have any of the fancy seating or anything.
Like a pickup version.
It is, but the difference is, and the reason why they call them buckboards is, I'm showing you some of those spring systems. That particular buggy has what they call a sideboard spring, but there's elliptical springs or all of it. A buckboard doesn't have that. It actually has, it's wood to wood, from axle to axle. So the reason why they call it a buckboard is because you look like this. I mean, it was like riding a bucking bronc, and it truly was a buckboard. The other thing, and that's a great question, a lot of guys, I'll tell you a fun story that I tell sometimes. All you guys have seen Western movies before, right? And you were mentioning Gunsmoke and all that. Hollywood does not depict these days accurately. No surprise there, right? We've all seen the Western movies, the covered wagons going across the deserts, and 50 or 100 covered wagons and stuff. You know what they never tell you in the movies, or never show you in the movies? The last 3 or 4 of those wagons, depending on the size of the wagon train, were filled with nothing but extra wheels. Okay? And the reason for that is, as they're going across the desert and stuff, they're breaking spokes and fallows, the outside piece of wood, they're breaking, damaging things. Or sometimes in the really hot desert climate, spokes, the wood shrinks and they get loose and stuff. Well, they can't fix those on the fly. So they pull those wheels off, put a new one on, and they get to the next town. Their length of stay in those towns was dependent on how long it took the wheelwright in that town to fix all those broken wheels, because you can't go on without it. So they could be camped outside your town for weeks till months sometimes, getting all their wheels repaired. And that was good business. Economically, it was a great business for the townspeople, because suddenly you got 100 people in town buying your products and stuff. The other thing that they never tell you in the movies is that when they were moving across these hot climates, and they would come to a spring or whatever, they would pull their wagons in or take buckets of water and pour it on their wheel hubs to keep the spokes swollen, tight. In the morning, like I was telling you with the soap, that they never wasted anything. If you had coffee left over in the morning, you didn't waste it. You poured it on your wheel pump. Because that, you know, just throw it away. That was wasteful. Okay, and here's where it gets fun. Us guys. Along the trail, you didn't want to waste anything, so you relieved yourself on the wheel pump. Okay. Now, I actually said that very same comment to a really neat RV club we had in here last summer. We had like 40 people, and I just had made that comment. And this one lady standing next to her husband, she goes like this. I'm not kidding. She goes like that. And he goes, what? She goes, you still do that? I'm not kidding you. I laughed really hard. I mean, but they didn't depict, you know, those days as very accurate at all. Is the point of that story. Yeah. Any other questions I could take? Well, thank you. Have another beer or whatever, and thank you,
Thank you, Jerry and Laurie. I'm sure I saw Laurie go back there with some rack cards, so be sure and pick one up when you leave, so you have a reminder to visit Raymond on purpose and not just drive through it. It sounds like, yeah, there's a great bed and breakfast there, so make a trip out of it.
And these are little refrigerator magnets that have great logo on them, but because you were able to answer so many questions.
Oh, all right. Prizes.
And where's the people from New York? You guys got to take one of these back and there you go. Okay.
And as Jerry said, those pictures don't do justice for the actual vehicles. They are amazing. We also note that there were no ropes or stanchions or whatever around it. Well, thank you. So you can get up close and personal with these things. I don't think you can climb in them, but you can get up and look, you know, right at it and notice all the fine detail and everything. So thank you again. That was tremendous. Next month we have Nancy Bell Anderson is going to tell kind of a true story. It's not kind of, it's definitely a true story, but her great aunt came across on the Oregon Trail in, I'm sure, one of these vehicles. And she came here and she was one of the first woman doctors in Oregon. And you're going to learn the story of that. Nancy is the director at the Napkin Cove Quarantine Center. If you read the paper today, you notice they had a tremendous article, kind of appropriate to what's going on nowadays with quarantine and stopping the viruses and that kind of stuff. So if you didn't read that, go read the Astorian in the weekend section. And as you go by, there's always a clipboard back there if you're not on our mailing list, so that you get reminders of what the subject's going to be. You'll get a reminder on Monday of what the subject is Thursday night. And if you want to help support the museum, Seaside Museum, someday hopefully we'll grow up and be like the Carriage Museum, we hope. But you can help us by joining the museum, taking some of the information, passing it around to your friends and neighbors. Again, thank you very much for coming.